Okay, and it says we're recording. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Today is well, first I want to welcome everybody to the World Citizen Virtual Book Club. This is our second session on the Constitution for the Federation of Earth with historical introduction, commentary, and conclusion by Glen T. Martin. Um, we are lucky enough to have Glenn with us whenever we read a book and we have an author who is both still alive and available. We love to feature them. And so in a few moments, I'll hand it over to Glenn and he'll be saying a few words to get us started. Reminding everybody that we are today going up to and including, or we were asked to read up to and including Article 9 of the Earth Constitution. I'm going to now mute everyone so we don't hear the dogs barking and the children crying in the background and all. I'll remind everybody when we go to the question and comment phase to unmute yourselves when you when you want to ask one of those questions. I'll also mention a little bit of protocol for the questions, and then after that period, we'll have a few announcements at the end and then wrap up for today. So without any further ado, and Glenn, since I'm going to hit the mute all button, you'll be muted too. So you will need to unmute yourself once I push that button. So okay. So with that, Glenn, take it away.
Okay, okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, as we saw in the last time you all met, which I missed because I got the time wrong, the Constitution was written over a period of 23 years by hundreds of world citizens working together. And they were very aware of world problems, global problems, and they were aware, of course, of the failure of the UN to deal with these problems. And that failure was structural, not from their point of view. It was not just, that the UN had bad leaders. It was the UN is not designed, they said, to handle these problems. So I think the preamble is very important here. And what I might want to do, maybe it would be best if I spoke a little bit about each of the articles and including the preamble, and then let people dialogue about it. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. So the preamble, and I go into this in the commentary section after the Constitution is finished. I have a commentary on it in this book, and the preamble, I think you may have noticed, is premised on holism. Right, the most famous and often quoted passage is the third from the bottom, the long one, which says, "Conscious that humanity is one, despite the existence of diverse nations, races, creeds, ideologies, and cultures." Excuse me, and that the principle of unity and diversity is the basis for a new age when war shall be outlawed and peace prevail, and when the earth's total resources shall be equitably used for human welfare, and when basic human rights and responsibilities shall be shared by all without discrimination. And so this beautiful idea that all of humanity shares resources equitably, which means eliminating the horror of world poverty, the 1 billion people that now live in extreme poverty in the world, and rights and go with responsibilities. It envisions a world system in which people take their responsibilities seriously. It isn't just demanding rights, but for every right, as I think we all know, there are corresponding responsibilities in the social fabric that we all live within. So the preamble intersperses this vision of holism, which in my many writings, I emphasize this repeatedly, that the paradigm that has arisen out of contemporary science is the holistic paradigm. You know, Einstein, 2005, when he came out with his special theory of relativity, uh, took the Newtonian fragmented worldview and combined space, time, matter, energy, all of it is one holistic reality. And then, of course, quantum physics has moved that even forward and deeper, so that we now see that the entire universe is everything is interdependent with everything else. And of course, the nation states, human beings are not. We're the only thing that is not, that somehow we institutionally we defy that with our absolute borders and our militarized nations and our repudiation of different races and different religions and so on. So this statement of holism, I think, is very important. And notice that it is in the statement, it is interspersed with declarations of the failure of the old paradigm. So the third paragraph, the second paragraph says, aware of the interdependence of people, nations, and all life. Right? It's a statement of ecology too. All life, as we know, is interdependent. And then it says, aware that man's abuse of science and technology has brought humanity to the brink of disaster through the production of horrendous weaponry of mass destruction and the brink of ecological and social catastrophe. So it goes on, some paragraphs talking about the catastrophe of the old paradigm that has brought humanity to the brink of destruction. And then other paragraphs clearly based on the holistic paradigm that that can redeem us, that the whole Constitution is based on in the minds of these thinkers. So anyway, with that little introduction about the preamble, do people have thoughts about it? Questions, comments?
Oh, Glenn, did you want to do that after each article, or go through it and save it to the end?
Either way, if you whatever you think is best. But I was thinking after each one, but
Oh, okay, that's fine. Well, let's do it that way.
Yeah.
So if you, okay, so I'll take a cue after each one. So I see David Orton, okay, and then Simon. Okay, so let me then take a moment and say what I was going to say when we got into the question and answer period, which is I would appreciate, just so that we get through all the material, that people are brief in their questions or comments, and that if you're promoting something, if you have a book, an event, an organization, or anything that you want to promote, please don't do that during this period. We will have at the end a period of announcements. So please save those promotional things for the announcements at the end. So with that, I will start by unmuting. Oh, you already did. That's right. Okay, David, take it away.
I think the spirit of the preamble is wonderful. I just have one little nitpick thing, and that's in the third paragraph when it says the word man's abuse rather than humanity, because
Yeah.
the next line does use humanity, and after that it has humanity again. So the reason for mentioning this is wondering whether the original language of the Constitution was in English and then translated into other languages, or whether the original language was something else and then some translator translated it into English that would use man's instead of humanity.
Well, this was the basic draft of the. I'm old enough to remember, right? The basic draft was done in 1972, and then it was confirmed in 1977 at the Second Constituent Assembly, and then finally a number of words were changed in 1991. And at the last one. So then they said it's now finished. And in those days, we were in transition from man, right, to man was a common thing, representing all men. And now we're more aware of that. But I think when they wrote this, the spirit, of course, is humanity. That's what they mean. Um, and so, my take on this whole thing is that we need to ratify this Constitution in spite of any flaws that it has. It has a few flaws. If I were doing writing it, I would change a few things, right? And so would any thoughtful person. There's no perfect, that will satisfy everybody. But so it's considered finished, and then once we've created the World Parliament under Article 18, it is easy to change things, right? So that might be one of the first things they change is let's make this any reference to men, let's make it more generic, right? And so anyway, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, what was the original language?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, English. It was written in English. Yeah. And
Right.
so the other, it was one of the things that happened after the 1977, the Second Constituent Assembly liked it very much, but they had flaws in it. There were flaws in it. Like, for example, they when they referred to money, they called it dollars. Right now they changed that in 1991 to currency, right, and so on, because people said this sounds imperialistic, and whatever. But it got translated right away because people were so enthusiastic. So some of the translations out there are not complete, right? And one of the things that we're doing to the extent of our resources is now looking at translations of them. Originally it's in 23 different languages. And so we're looking for people who are competent in both languages to reconfirm those translations to make sure they're good translations.
Great. Thank you, David and Glenn. Simon, you're next.
A wonderful book you've written, Glenn. Just incredibly complete and complex and well designed. And it's really, isn't it a blueprint really for like an architect writes a blueprint, and then the engineers come to build the blueprint into reality. And this is a wonderful blueprint in my view. And the difficulties I have, as we all have, I'm sure, is to put it into reality, how to implement these things into physical reality. The other little question I have, second question, is about the constituent assemblies that were active before, during this book was being written. If you could answer these two questions, which are difficult questions, particularly the first one, Glenn.
Is it a blueprint, and you have something about the constituent assemblies? What did you want to know about that?
I wanted to know this blueprint that you have beautifully written. How can we bring it into reality, physical reality, like we need to, obviously. This is a theory. How do we practice it?
Thank you, Simon. I didn't write the Constitution, as you know, right? It was written by hundreds of world citizens working together in those, and the high points were those 4 constituent assemblies, right? So it was finished by 1991 in the 4th assembly, and I didn't even find out about it or join it until 1995. So it was already finished when what I've done here with this book is put it in the framework of history and commentary and so on. In spite of what Bob said to hold off on promotion, I just want to mention I've got a new book coming out.
You're the exception, Glenn, to that.
Oh, my new book is going to be launched in May, and it's called Design for a Living Planet, the Earth Constitution Solution. And I agree with you, Simon, 100% that this offers a blueprint. And this blueprint is, I argue that we don't have time. Like, the World Federalist Movement in Europe thinks we got to elect citizens who then will elect a constituent assembly, who will then write a constitution. We don't have time. The earth is falling apart, right? Nuclear weapons might wipe us all out at any time. So we have to act. My argument is that we have to act on this blueprint. And the blueprint, like any good constitution, has an article that is used only once, and that's the article that says, how does this get ratified? And that's Article 17. All right, and we'll look at that. I'm sure you'll all have questions on that, so I won't go into that in detail, but Article 17 shows how the people of Earth can ratify it, right? It has to be democratically ratified by the people and nations of Earth. No one can impose it, right? And in one other article, Article 19, which is very important because the last article allows human beings to start it now, as far in a provisional world government, right? And that's what these provisional world parliaments, they're the main thing that we have begun. We've had 14 sessions, and the 15th session is coming up in December. So, this is governmental. We're saying we're starting it, and we want the people of Earth to say, here we have a blueprint, and we're effectively trying to start it. You need to respond to this. All right. So anyway, I hope that addresses your question, Simon.
Great. Go ahead, Simon, but I just want to remind people we have the preamble and 9 articles to go through.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I was a little leery about doing this each time. But
Yeah,
let's try
yeah.
it, but we need
Thank
to
you.
be brief.
Thank
So
you
let's
again.
get in. Yeah, let me
Thank
get
you,
anybody
Bob.
in who has not
Thank
yet
you.
spoken. So Gail, you're up next. You need to unmute yourself,
Okay.
and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I was wondering, there's mention of a new world order, and I wondered, that it's been talked about very recently by Klaus Schwab, and I wondered if it was referring to that or if it was referring more generally to something else. I also wanted to mention that we have a new member, Maria Inez Ramirez from Asuncion, Paraguay. So welcome.
Welcome. Hello. That's another, like the word men, right, that was pointed out before. That's another unfortunate expression. The phrase New World Order didn't get the bad connotations that it now has until George H. Bush, right, started talking about creating a new world order dominated by global banking and globalized multinational corporations and so on. So we now speak of a new world system. We use the word system intentionally to try to, whenever we write anything, explain anything, we say that we're in a race against the new world order, right? We don't want that to happen. So we can look at a totalitarianism of the rich and powerful nations and corporations, or we can look at a world democracy. That's our choice. One is a new world order, the other is a new world system.
Great, thank you. I'm going to, due to the time, I'm going to move us on to Article 1. So Glenn, anything you would like to say about that? And then we'll go back to our questions and comments.
So this, as you know, spells out the broad functions, right, of the Earth Federation. And these functions cover the range of what a world government, a democratic world government, could and should be doing, in my view. And so prevent the number one, very important. If we want to save the global environment, in my argument, we can't do it unless we stop the war system, the national war system that spends 1.8 trillion US a year on war and armaments and nuclear weapons and the rest of it. Prevent war, secure disarmament, protect universal human rights, right? And those are articulated in detail in Articles 12 and 13. Obtain for all people on earth conditions required for equitable economic and social development and diminishing social differences. Justice, in other words, distributive justice, so that we end poverty on the earth. Regulate world trade and all those things necessary for an integrated world system. And then 1.5, protect the environment and the ecological fabric of life from all sources of damage. Control technological innovations whose effects transcend national boundaries for the purpose of keeping the earth a safe, healthy, and happy home for humanity. And in my new book that's just coming out, I point out the immense number of passages throughout the Constitution that have to do with that, with the global environment and so on. And then the last one, which I think is absolutely fundamental, because it addresses the spirit of the Constitution, to devise and implement solutions to all problems beyond the capacity of national governments, right? No government on earth can create peace. No government on earth can disarm the world. No government on earth can protect the environment, because the environment is global. It's not territorial. And so, any solutions that, if we have a planetary civilization, the function of the world government is to make sure it's a decent and just and sustainable civilization. Okay, questions? Any questions or thoughts?
Okay, I'll take a cue. So I see Donna first. Any other hands? Going once, I'll put myself in. Okay, Donna, take it away.
Hi, Glenn. Like David, I find, and Simon, I find the Constitution very inspiring and very complete but also a bit overwhelming. And I agree with you completely that we're running out of time. We don't have a lot of time, but I think we also have a lot of people who distrust government. And so this list of all the broad functions, I find a bit off-putting. And I'm an advocate for World Federation, but maybe it's that I've been hanging out with Soveda Mahani Ewing too much, and I'm starting to win over to her, or enough that she proposes that perhaps we should start a little smaller, like let the government tackle the environment and human rights and maybe nuclear weapons or something, like try to pick 3 things and let people become more comfortable that, okay, this is going to work. It's not going to become tyranny. We're not going to eliminate the nations. We're not going to take away everybody's guns in the US or whatever other countries are worried about. Anyway, and then expand it. So, I don't know. Do you have any comments on that? On my, can you allay my fears or something? I don't know. It just seems like it's a lot to ask people to buy into.
In One World Renaissance, my 2016 book, chapter 7 addresses that question, because it's people ask it all the time. This is a very powerful government, right? And just wait till we get to Article 4, right? If you're worried about Article 1, right? And I often respond as a philosopher, Hannah Arendt. As you know, she was a famous political philosopher in the U.S. She writes about political issues, and she says the problem is not power; the problem is violence. And she says if a government has the overwhelming consent of the governed, and the government governed are very clear that it is addressing the common good of everybody, it will be powerful. It should be powerful, right? And she argues that the weaker a government is, the more it results to violence. Right? We think of Black Lives Matter, right? If the government was powerful and embracive, they wouldn't be repressed by the police the way they are, but our government is not as legitimate as we might hope, and so on. And the less legitimate, the more they result to violence. But I think, and you know, in order to address the rest of your question, I think that the transformation needs to be comprehensive. That, as I was saying a moment ago, I don't think we can protect the environment without disarming the nations and creating a peace system in the world. I think all these things go together because we're in a world system now, right? A broken world system of capitalist, super rich corporations doing whatever the hell they want, and nations and so on. And unless we overcome that fragmentation and really join holistically together in what the spiritual people call a new level of consciousness, right? The second, you've probably heard, the second axial age we're supposed to be in. So in my view is that we really need to be thinking differently, and that this kind of transformation that's going on in this constitution, proposed constitution, this transformation is complete because it sees that we have to be living on a new level. We just can't evolve the old, you know, say, oh, we need incremental changes. We need to be thinking differently, right? Thinking as in terms of our common humanity and so on. So anyway, that's, you know, I won't go into it because Bob is worried about getting through more of the, but that's my response. You know, I think we do need powerful government. And but if when we look at these articles, we'll see that all kinds of checks and balances are built in, right? I think it's very, very safe. And as I say, I've written about this in chapter 7 of One World Renaissance, and that chapter is now on our website, earthconstitution.world website, because the question is often asked. You know? So you can go to the website and see my arguments there. Okay.
Thank you. As Glenn was talking, I thought I saw two more people raise their hands, so I want to check. Bharat, I saw you first. Was that yes? And then Simon, correct? Okay, so I'm in line next, then I'll get Bharat and Simon, then we'll move on to the next article. So actually, Donna often reads my mind, and she did with her question. So I'll ask just a small part of that, and also make a quick comment. That yeah, so my understanding, when I've looked at different proposals for a world government, what it might look like, they do go on a spectrum from, you know, what they call themselves minimalist, like let's just end war, let's just do this, let's just do that, to what Juncker said in what he called it pejoratively in his book, which we read, is the what is it? The omnipotent world state. Something at the other end that is just so encompassing, so whatever. And it does seem from the different proposals I've seen that this is the most omnipotent. I mean, this is the one that you know, that is the most comprehensive. Not to say that's a bad thing, but it does seem like the most inclusive. My question then, other than, you know, the concerns that some people would have and resistance to it, is I'm just curious, has anyone done a breakdown of how of the size of the staff of this world government, this blueprint, and what the budget would be? I know later on we'll talk about how it gets funded. I think that's in a later article. Right. But what, right. How big is it? How many staff people will this world government have, and how much will it cost?
You think I'm kind of like a prophet? I can tell you that.
Well, no, I'm wondering, has anybody worked that out? It seems like you'd be able to.
Well, Eugenia Allman has done some work in that area. And in various sessions of the Provisional World Parliament, we have talked about funding for laws, and the funding is huge, right? And it's huge because we're talking about planet Earth, all of planet Earth. And just as, you know, this is not a government that's going to be located in some country, Great Britain or whatever, right? It's going to have offices everywhere around the planet, just like in the United States. The US government has offices, FBI and tax offices and all kinds of, they have it everywhere, right? Roanoke is, you know, there's offices right near where I am, and so on. And so it will be part of the infrastructure of the world, right? And lots of people, just like I live in a town of 15,000 people, and lots of them work for the city government, right? They work for maintenance, they work for the treasury, they work, we pay bills there, they have a parking, there's lots of people that work for government. And I think it'll be the same. I think it'll be kind of an accepted, we citizens of Bradford are not hostile to them. In fact, we respect them. They do great work for us, and we're happy to pay taxes. And so I think that it will be, as I said before, it'll be a whole different attitude toward government, and government will in the United States, as we know, the founders came from the Lockean tradition, right? Thomas Jefferson they were all followers of John Locke. And Locke said, human beings have natural rights prior to government, and the government has to be minimalist. It must protect those rights. So there's this hostility between the natural freedoms and rights in Locke's philosophy and government. But I think that Locke was mistaken. I think Rousseau was much better, and Kant was much better in their envisioning of what a social contract would be like. So anyway, that's short answer, Bob. I don't know if is that okay?
Great. Yeah, no, anything you say is what you say. So
Anything
that's okay.
I say.
Yeah, just wanted to get your answer. Thank you. Okay, so then let's get Bharat in, then Simon, and then we'll move on to the next article. Go ahead, Bharat.
Hello, Glenn. Thank you very much. I'm amazed at your idealism and comprehensive sense of seeing a humanity's future. I applaud you for that. But I have a couple questions that concern me. One is seeing the nature of human beings as it has evolved over the centuries, the kinds of mistrust we have. We saw a lot of that in this trial that's taking place in Washington, D.C., where even another person's word is like seen as a total anathema. So
Right.
it seems to me that in order to actualize the conception of the world constitution, there needs to be some steps that'll have to be taken. And my feeling is perhaps it has to begin with not our generation. I don't know if we are capable to really transform ourselves to behave like that. But maybe the young generation to be born, and maybe the very young one. And it seems all cultures have evolved because of education, has been a key to that. So the question I have is there a kind of an educational plan that begins right at the point of conception or infinity, infancy, I mean, that we evolve?
Yeah.
So now the final question is, when do you see this become real? Is there any kind of a sense of a timeline for this? Anyway,
Those are, Bharat, thank you for those questions. They're huge questions. Just like every question that people have asked up till now is huge. It isn't just Article 1, right? These are huge questions. There's a movement, as you all may know, having to do with there's a whole group called evolutionary leaders, right? And we just had a Zoom meeting with them Wednesday, and some of them, and so they go by this thing called spiral dynamics, or Ken Wilber's stages of moral and spiritual development, and there's a lot I've written on this, and I include this in my forthcoming book, and I also included in my last book, Global Democracy and Human Self-Transcendence, right? That's the name of that, human self-transcendence. I think we're capable of this kind of self-transcendence. And so there are stages. When we're young, we're egoistic. right? And as we develop and get acculturated, we become, in these stages, we become ethnocentric, right? We think somehow that what we grew up in somehow is common sense. But then as we grow, we begin to realize that people around the world look at things differently than we do. And we become world centric, right? And and, respectful and tolerant, like uh, um, the World Parliament of Religions, we embrace one another and engage in dialogue and so on. But there's another level that Ken Wilber and these thinkers talk about, and that they call it cosmocentric, right? That there are spiritual levels, and human beings are destined to be moving in through these spiritual levels. And so there, the question becomes, how can we activate a spiritual renaissance for humanity, right? I mean, it's possible. If we look in history, we see that realizations here and there have taken place suddenly. The Renaissance, for example, suddenly everybody was thinking differently in the Renaissance, 15th century Italy. And so we think, some people think, I think, that we're on the verge of another Renaissance, that global consciousness, the environmentalists are all saying, unless we have global consciousness, we're not going to have a future on this planet. We have to be aware that the biosphere is, we're absolutely dependent upon it. And right now we're destroying it. And so global consciousness, biospheric consciousness, holistic consciousness, these are things that are happening in us. There's a kind of growth process. And this is the final point I want to make here. In my argument, the Constitution is not simply an end of a goal where spiritually awakened people have to will be how they'll be living, but it's also a means, because insofar as we talk about this, as we promote it, as we interact with people about it, people are looking at it, and just the thinking about it, just the looking at the design, just thinking about how human life could really be differently is a spiritual catalyst to help people become world centric. Anyway, that's in the short form, that's my argument there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm going to get Simon in and then Arthur, but since about 3 or 4 people joined us after we started and I laid out the guidelines, I just want to repeat for those who haven't heard. First, please be brief in your question or comment. Secondly, if you're promoting something like a book you wrote, an organization you have, a program you give, please save that till the end and don't do the promotion during the Q&A period. There will be time at the end. Thank you. Simon, you got it.
Again, thank you, everyone. Glenn also. The question I have, Glenn, is the following. We have had this federalism since 1947 and Citizens for Global Society, that's 74 years now this year. However, in 1949, 2 years after that, arose the European Union idea, 1949, and they immediately embraced it. And most of these ideas about holism are incorporated in the European Union rather than European federalism. Yes. Our country, our USA is federal, but you see what the problems we have here in federalism. But the Union created the peace for 72 years since 49. They are living with free healthcare, free education up to the PhD level. They are doing all these things in practice for 72 years. So why not start maybe like a world union? That is my idea, where somebody can exit if they don't like it, like Britain exited. Because what happened, as you know, because the world was not like the European Union, the refugees came and mixed it up, gave trouble to the European Union. And so they are in trouble now because the world is not like them. and these not like them world came and interfered with them and began to spoil them. So if we could have a world union, then maybe this could be put into practice like the extension of the European Union, which is my idea, which works until we go to the federal system, if we want, because the federal, you can't get out. The world union, you can get out if you don't like it. Like
actually, the Constitution, we'll see when next time when we look at the rest of it, it does make provision for people being outside it, right? They can get out, right? That once you're committed to the federal, you don't get out, but as individuals, as groups, they can move outside. It makes it says reserving, I believe, 10% of the world's good land or whatever for people who don't want to be part of the Federation. But nevertheless, in my view, to most people, it'll be self-evident that they want to be part of the Federation, right? Just as you were saying about the European Union, you know, how nice to live in Denmark or you know, those other nations where you have healthcare and decent wages and a peaceful social environment and so on. That's what we need for the world, right? And once people see that the Earth Constitution will realize that for the world, it'll get rid of the terrible global south of poverty exploited by global banking in favor of the global north. All of that will be gone, right? And we'll have a decent global civilization. And who's you know, maybe a few people will want to escape it, but most people will say this is wonderful, right? We don't want, you know, we like this. It makes possible a decent life for everybody. So anyway, that's my thought on that. But as I was saying before, Simon, you know, this is a blueprint that right now is considered final. You know, it isn't like you know, a draft. We're trying to get it ratified, because if it was a draft, you couldn't ratify it under Article 17, right? Because you got to have a, you know, a concrete document that if you're going to have voting and ratification. So this is the concrete document. If it needs modification, that can be done after ratification, as I was saying before.
what is ratification?
Thank you, Glenn.
Who's involved with ratification? Who is involved in the world?
Well, we'll look at that with Article 17,
Okay.
right? Today we're only doing up to Article 9.
Great. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Okay, Arthur, you got the last word on this article, then we'll move on. Just unmute yourself.
Well, I'm just so glad that Glenn mentioned spiral dynamics and how our thinking evolves from, you know, first to sort of a legalistic copying the old framework to a new, and then emerging to something more dynamic and interactive with people. And I do appreciate that he has a fixed document for ratification now, but I'd love to see how you'd like to interact to continue to evolve from that, as you said, maybe after ratification, or to plan beyond it for your future books, but toward more fluid, interactive global system. I know, you know, Gary Davis talked about, you know, this integrity system that doesn't wait for, you know, global system that starts as something that's interactive between people, like these kind of Zoom talks, but has certain tools and advantages that are bringing to the top the highest and best wisdom, and people start interacting with that, and it starts becoming something so valuable, like an app that everybody wants to do it, and you begin to give it teeth by creating citizen forms of enforcement. And you know, I think there's ways we can, I love all these different methods. Every path is important because they're all doing what you said, raising the consciousness that we have to think globally and think as world citizens. But I guess ask, as you continue to write books and in this field, do you want to continue to move the vision forward into a more interactive, you know, blockchain-oriented, people-oriented system, synergistic system?
Well,
Thank you, Arthur.
One of the things that we have been developing the last few years is a response to a number of criticisms that said the Constitution is top down, right? You know, it's like this one blueprint for everybody. and it's, you know, we have all kinds of projects going on around the world run by WCPA people, feeding people in India who, you know, and the rest of it, educating people and so on. And it's synergistically, the top and the bottom need to be together in what I call holarchy, right? A holarchy isn't just an anarchy of everybody on, you know, doing their own thing. A holarchy means the top and the bottom interact in a healthy and spiritually awakened way, a holism. So I'll send you a copy of my book when it comes out in May, Arthur, and you can, you know, you can address that question in terms of my arguments there, you know, but ultimately it's another very large question, right? You know, we're still on Article 1 and it's a very large question. And but I think all the interaction and the synergy is excellent. Spiral dynamics, excellent. But I think the Constitution as a fixed document is a key to helping us move forward. You know, that's my argument now.
Great. Glenn, let me ask you a quick question from a facilitation standpoint. Since we've covered 2 of the 10 sections that we're trying to cover in an hour, and we have a little more than a half hour to go, do you think it would make sense to for you to go through the rest of the articles up through 9, and then we'll take questions through to the end of the time?
Okay, that sounds fine.
Great, thank you. So take it away.
Okay, Article 2, the key is 2.2, bottom of page 29. All right, world government for the Federation of Earth shall be non-military and shall be democratic in its own structure, with ultimate sovereignty residing in all the people who live on the earth. All right, this question of sovereignty is a long one in philosophy of law, which I'm teaching a course right now in philosophy of law, and I think it's something that needs to be appreciated, and that is that the only legitimate sovereignty, Errol Harris, philosopher Errol Harris also makes this same argument, that the only legitimate sovereignty is the sovereignty that comes from the people of Earth themselves, as expressed in the Earth Constitution, because sovereignty means that it has 2 features to it. One is that a government has power over its territory. It has the capacity to enforce laws. But the other feature sovereignty has, for most philosophers of law, is legitimacy. Right? A government the Nazi government was powerful over its territories, but it was not legitimate. Right? And legitimacy requires democracy, consent of the government, governed, and so on. So no nation on earth is legitimate anymore, because the legitimacy comes from a nation, a government, serving the common good of its citizens. Right? There's no nation on earth can do this, because the common good is now planetary. There's no nation on earth that can get rid of those nuclear weapons that are endangering us every single day of the year. Right? There's no nation on earth that can protect the global environment. There's no nation on earth that can give us universal human rights protection. So every government on earth is illegitimate, because they do not recognize the only truly legitimate sovereignty, which is the sovereignty of the people of Earth, the common good of everybody. We're all the same. We all have the same rights. We all have the same dignity. That's what has to be recognized. And that's, of course, that's fundamental to the Earth Constitution. Okay, so Article 3 is, you see that on page 31, that's the organs. It's just simply a list of the main organs: the World Parliament, the World Executive, World Administration, Integrative Complex, the World Judiciary, the Enforcement System, and the World Ombudsman. And then Article 4 And this is the one I mentioned earlier. If you're worried about Article 1 being too comprehensive, Article 4 gives the sovereign people of Earth all kinds of powers, right? Power to prevent war and armed conflict, to supervise disarmament, to prohibit incitement to war, right? To provide the means for peaceful and just solutions. And then it goes on, in 41 different items to, and here's the key thing. Right now, I think, right now the world is dominated by the global banking cartels, World Bank, IMF, the global imperial nations, China, Russia, United States, the global multinational corporations, and the super rich who own a tiny group of whom own 50% of the world's wealth, right? We need, if we're going to have a decent future on this planet, we need to put the people of Earth in power over those gigantic forces. They have to be over the banking cartels. Get rid of the Federal Reserve in the United States, which is a private banking cartel, right? They have to be over the multinational corporations, which now do pretty much whatever they feel like doing. It must be over the giant militarized nation states. You've got to have the authority to disarm the United States and disarm China and disarm, how are we going to do this unless we have the people of Earth recognizing their sovereignty and having a means to do that? And that means is the Earth Constitution, right? So that's what Article 4 does. It gives the people of Earth the authority to protect the global environment. And it says, for example, one big issue right now is the question of the global commons, right? This article, The Tragedy of the Commons, came out in the 1960s, and people said, if you have a commons, it's going to get ruined by everybody trying to use it. And so I have argued in articles that the global commons needs to be owned by the people of Earth, right? The UN Sustainable Development Goals in item 18 of their document says that every nation owns its own natural resources, its own economic processes. It's every nation within its borders had control of its own water and air and so on. This is a prescription for disaster for the Earth, because it allows, for example, under the UN system, the SDG system, it allows Brazil to destroy the lungs of the Earth, right? We know that most of the lungs of the Earth, there's some in Ecuador and the other nations there, but most of the lungs of the Earth are in Brazil. And right now, the government of Brazil is cutting down and destroying the lungs of the Earth. And under the UN system, they have the legal right to do this, right? The US in 2016, President Trump became president. He withdrew from the Paris Climate Accords, right? The US has the legal right to do that, right? China, industrializing for the last 20 or 30 years, is putting carbon dioxide by millions and millions of tons a day into the global atmosphere. They have the legal right to do this within their territorial boundaries, right? And the Earth Constitution says no. The atmosphere of the Earth belongs to the people of Earth, right? The oceans of the Earth, which are now being destroyed by overfishing and the so-called Convention of the Sea, isn't working at all. Environmentalists point this out right and left. The oceans of the Earth are dying, but those oceans belong to the people of Earth, just as the air and the water and the lungs of the Earth, the forests, everything necessary to make a healthy living for future generations. They belong to, that's why the people of Earth need to be sovereign, right? So anyway, that's kind of a summary of all this stuff that go in Article 4. It gives real authority to the government, and I think it's necessary if they're going to salvage the Earth. Okay, Article 5, functions and powers of the World Parliament. It's a parliamentary system, all right? The ultimate authority in this system is the World Parliament, and it's got, as you know, it's got three houses: the House of Peoples, the House of Nations, and the House of Councillors. And the House of Peoples is by far the largest house. It will have 1,000 representatives from 1,000 electoral districts around the world, roughly equal by population. Then the House of Nations will have 1, 2, or 3 representatives from each nation. And the nations decide how they're going to choose these representatives. So the bigger nations with large populations, they'll have 3 representatives in the House of Nations. Little tiny nations like Haiti or Cuba will have 1 representative in the House of Nations. So we'll have 300 people there. And then there'll be 200 people in the House of Councillors. And this is a unique feature of this Constitution, because the House of Councillors is an attempt to get wise people into government. And so students and faculty around the world, from the 20 world administrative districts, the 1,000 electoral districts will be clumped together in 20 world administrative districts. And students and faculty will be voting to nominate the best people, right? The students know who their professors are, who are great environmentalists or great human rights leaders and so on. The best people will be nominated, and then they will be elected by the other 2 houses of the World Parliament. And so we'll have 200 people who have a unique role. The House of Councillors has a unique role. Primarily its role is nominations for positions, right? So it isn't like the United States where you get into Congress real dumb people, right? Let's just face it, there's some mighty dumb people there, this Marjorie Greene who comes in with her gun and so on. This will attempt to get wise people who represent the good of the whole into the World Parliament. So these 1,500 people are the ultimate authority. And then under them, there's the various organs, right? And in terms of Article 6, one of the organs is the World Executive, so the World Executive, like all the other organs, this is a very important point. There's no single person elected to head these agencies, any of the agencies, right? The World Executive will be a presidium of 5 persons, and they'll have a world cabinet of 20 to 30 persons. And these 5 persons will be elected by the World Parliament in joint session, in combined session. And so they will be the head of the World Executive, and their job, like any executive branch, is to implement the decisions of the legislative branch, to implement all the programs that are necessary to run a world. And so they will be the head of the world administration, right? And you'll have, just to jump ahead, you can see at the end of the world administration on pages 47 and 48, there's 28 different departments, right? Department on multinational corporations, a Department of Transportation, Department of Commerce and Industry, a Department of Science and Technology, Department of Education, and so on, Department of Democratic Procedures, right? So their job is to just run the Earth Constitution, run the world government according to the Earth Constitution. Notice number 4 on page 44, item 6.6. limitations on the world executive. Okay, the world executive may not at any time alter, suspend, abridge, or infringe or otherwise violate any provision of this world constitution. 6.6.2, the world executive may not have veto power. So much better than the US system, right, with the stupid veto power given to the president. It may not veto, right? The world executive may not dissolve the world parliament or any house of the parliament. World executive may not act contrary to the decisions of the world courts. The world executive is bound faithfully to execute all legislation, right? The world executive may not transcend or contradict the decisions and controls of the world parliament, the world judiciary, and the provisions of this constitution by any device of executive order, executive privilege, or emergency declaration or decree. Not only that, the world attorneys general, right, the prosecutors in the world courts and so on, in the world civilian world police are not under the authority of the world executive like they are in the United States, right? The world police are completely, in the world attorneys general, are a completely independent agency responsible directly to the world parliament. So this executive is not going to have any enforcement means by which to disrupt, right? The executive is always a dangerous thing. In the modern world of supersonic weapons carrying nuclear warheads, right, the executive branches have become immensely powerful, right? And legislative and judicial, much less so in all these countries, right? Because you got to have that presidential football carried around in case they want to wipe out humanity, you know, in some decision, you know. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. So the world administration function, this is Article 7, functions under the leadership of the executive cabinet, and this describes the functioning of the administration and in what way the departments of the administration will be staffed and so on. And what they will be doing, every person who's in the executive cabinet of the Presidium has 5 people, right? It requires, when the World Parliament elects these 5, it requires that they be elected 1 from each continent, right? So you can't have 2 from any one continent. You've got to have 1 from Asia, 1 from Europe, 1 from North America, 1 from South America, 1 from Africa, right? And this is the same with the other, all the other agencies. 5, they're all run by a presidium of 5, often supplemented by larger cabinets and so on. But there's no single person that's ever the head of anything in this Constitution, right? So the departments we looked at listed on page 47 and 48. The integrative complex, very important, and I could spend hours on this, but I won't, Bob, because we have one more item after Article 8. But the integrative complex is available to all the organs of government. Their job is to serve the parliament, and to serve the houses of parliament, and to serve the administration, and to serve the world ombudsman and everything else. So they're staffed by people who are experts and from the World Civil Service Administration, which is the very first of these 7 different agencies. And so civil service, you got to have a world civil service of competent people, right, who are known to be good at what they do, and they've got the proper degrees and so on. You've got to have a world boundaries and elections administration, right? And that is, I think there's a key passage in that on page 50, 8.3 8.1.5, which is at the bottom of the last paragraph on page 50. And that is before each World Parliamentary election to prepare voters' information booklets, which will summarize major current public issues and shall list each candidate for elective office together with standard information about each candidate and give space for each candidate to state his or her views on the defined major issues. Right? They're taking elections out of the marketplace like they are in the United States, right? Multinational corporations or rich people will not be able to fund, this person running for, a Republican position or whatever, some nutcase, they're taking, this is the opposite of Citizens United, right? Everybody will have the same space because you're going to have a different world under this Constitution. A different world means that, it won't be political parties rabid to seize control because they're serving some ruling class, right? The Republicans serve the ruling class. The first thing they did under Trump was give huge tax breaks to the super rich in the United States, right? This, if you have government that is dedicated to the service of humanity, that you're not going to have this, right? The people, the sovereign people of Earth will be above the rich, and they will take steps, not violent steps, but procedural and carefully designed steps to eliminate that vast discrepancy between the rich and the poor that now distorts every democracy on Earth. So that's a key passage there. And then the Institute on Governmental 8.4, the Institute on Governmental Procedures and World Problems, they will be educating everybody who gets elected to Parliament. All 1,500 people will take courses in government procedures, courses in world problems, courses in how the Constitution deals with these world problems, right? They will be educated, right, in very, very carefully done processes, because we want people in the World Parliament to know what the hell they're doing, right? It's not a matter of power, like Mitch McConnell trying to keep power for the Republicans or whatever. It's absurd. It's an absurd way to do government. And so this makes sense out of government. So 8.5, the Agency for Research and Planning. If you've read Donna Meadows, right? Donna Meadows and her colleagues made a very well-known book called The Limits to Growth, and it came out in 1972. And then they did a 30-year update on the limits to growth that came out in 2002. And they said, if we want a decent environment for our planet, we have to extend the planning horizon for the world. We have to improve the monitoring of the human impact worldwide. We have to speed up response times to degradation and difficulties in environmental destruction. We have to prevent the erosion of renewable resources, they said. And we have to use all resources with maximum efficiency. And we have to stop exponential expansion of population and physical capital. Those were their 6 recommendations, right? If we want sustainability, this is what these agencies, the next 3 agencies, Research and Planning, and the Technological and Environmental Assessment Agency that follows this one, that's what they're about, right? Our world, if it's going to survive past the next century, is going to have to be monitored. The environment, everywhere. The impact of human activity. The population of the world is going to have to be reduced voluntarily, right? And we're going to have to extend the planning horizon beyond 4 years, right? It's got to be 50 years, right? 60 years, 100 years. That has to be a planning horizon. And this can only happen through world government. There's no country on earth that plans ahead that far, right? With China, it's 5-year plans, right? And so on. So this is what the world needs if it's going to survive. And then the agency on page 54, the next agency, Agency for Technological and Environmental Assessment, its job is to maintain a global monitoring of the environment, right? So that we see how the oceans are regenerating, or the soil is regenerating, or not. And so they're monitoring the environment. They're monitoring the effect of technologies on the environment, protecting the earth as a single biospheric whole. So then 8.7, the last significant one in the integrative complex. This is absolutely fundamental, because this answers, I think, Bob's question earlier a little bit. How are we going to pay for it, right? Because what this does, I don't know if any of you have read Ellen Brown's book, The Web of Debt. It came out in 2007. You should read that book, right? She's not the only author that's written about this, but for years I attended the meetings of the American Monetary Institute and their analysis, right? Private banking is an absurdity. Private banking is the ownership of the creation of money by private interests, not in the public interest, right? And what this does, what subsection 8.7.1.5 and 1.6 and 1.7 is establish global public banking, so that money will be like the roads, right? We don't privatize the roads because everybody needs the roads, right? They have to be public. The government has to maintain them. It's the same with money, right? Money, everybody needs money. Everybody has to interact with money and so on. And it's absurd to have that money creation in private hands. The Federal Reserve in the United States, private banks, a consortium of private banks. We create money in the United States as debt, right? And that's why the American people are like $17 trillion in debt. It's absurd. It doesn't need to happen, right? So this will give us unlimited resources, right? If money is not created in order to feed the super rich, if it's created for the benefit of humanity, it will give people the planet Earth the resources it needs to do everything necessary to keep a decent world system. Okay, I'm going as fast as I can, Bob.
You're doing great, Glenn. Thank you.
8.8, the Commission for Legislative Review will simply, look at legislation to make sure it's well written, and you've got to have good legislation, and we're very well aware of that, because we have sessions of the Provisional World Parliament in which we try to pass provisional world legislation. So we're following proper form and for legislation and so on. So they will do that. They will integrate international law with the emerging world law and so on. So finally, Article 9, the last article for today, the world judiciary creates a world court system. And the world court system will, it goes into how the judges are chosen. They have to be at least 30 years old. They have to have extensive legal experience. They also have to have extensive awareness of the humanities, which I think is excellent. And so they will be, they'll be certified as people who are truly experts in their field. And this will create a consortium, a collegium of world judges. And it's from 20 to 60 members in the collegium. And so this article describes how they're to be organized. They, like all the other agencies, they will elect 5 of the judges to be the presidium of the judges. So there'll be one from each continent in this as head of the Collegium of World Judges, and then they will distribute the justices into 8 different benches. Right, the bench for human rights, a bench for criminal cases, a bench for civil cases, a bench for constitutional cases, a bench for international conflicts, a bench for public cases with big consequences. They'll keep a separate bench for those, an appellate bench, and an advisory bench. The advisory branch will give legal advice to any people in the World Parliament, any agencies of the government in an official capacity. You know, if they want to know how this conforms to the Constitution, they will give them an advisory opinion. So the the world court system, and this can have subcourts, right? It's not just the 8 benches of a Supreme Court, but just like federal courts in the United States, you have various levels of federal authority, and this will have various levels of global authority throughout the world. So that world law will be enforced by the world police, who is Article 10, right? We're not going to look at that. And they'll be enforced, they'll be protected by the world ombudsman, Article 11, and the Collegium of World Judges, giving us a world of law rather than now it's a world of power. Even the nations of the world have the ability not to obey the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice because they're sovereign. Their sovereignty comes first. So that's Article 9. Okay, I'll stop there.
Great. Well, thank you, Glenn, for that tour de force through the next several articles. What I'm going to do is first ask, in the few minutes we have left, if anyone did not speak at all. If there's anyone who did not ask a question or make a comment who wants to, I'm going to put them at the head of the line. So please raise your hand if there. So I see David Gallup. Anybody else? And if you're not on visual, then just go off mute for a moment and say that you wanted to get in line. So is David Gallup the only one? Okay, then I'll put David first in line, then anyone who has only spoken once. Okay, I see David Orton, so we get the 2 Davids. I see Arthur, and anybody else who's only spoken once. Okay, and Gail. Okay, that's 4 people. That's probably enough to take us through to close. Oh, I see Lynn. Okay, Lynn has also not spoken at all. So we'll put Lynn up front right after David, and then the other David. And okay, and who was I writing last? Oh, okay, Gail. Yeah. Okay, terrific. Okay, so we have David. David Gallup, take it away.
Hi, Glenn. How do you reply to the concern that there are not enough checks and balances in the Earth's Constitution, that the World Parliament is the most powerful of all the branches, and then it seems like the judiciary and the executive are below that, and even the ombudsmen are voted upon by people in the Parliament? So, how do you deal with that concern?
Well, I think that when you get 1,500 people from every corner of the earth who are educated through the Institute on World Global Procedures and World Problems, you have the best. Bertrand Russell said, "Democracy is a terrible system, but it's the best one." Right? It's the best of all the, and you have the best that can be done. Right? Who are we going to put over them? Some minority in the judiciary. In the U.S., we have 12 idiots, on the Supreme Court, and so I don't think there's any that I think the safety is precisely in their diversity and their numbers, and I can't personally imagine how, if you had an executive that could veto legislation, you'd have a small group of people dictating something to all these representatives who are duly elected from around the world. I don't see any other way of doing it.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. Okay, next up is Lynn and then David Orton. Go ahead, Lynn, take yourself off mute.
I just wondered when the discussion was happening about environmental hazards and international regulation of those, and like China. And I just wondered how it would be legislated through the World Court that, you know, we've been expropriating or outsourcing all of our manufacturing to China for many years. And it's really not fair for them to suddenly say, well, it's all equal now. Do you know, get the idea of what I'm saying, Glenn? And also, I liked what you said about Hannah Arendt and wanted to hear again what you said about her and the large scale of things. Anyway, go ahead.
Everywhere, part of what I argue is that any constitution creates a moral reality, right? So one of the things that so shocked us about January 6th is they seem to have broken the social contract, right? The idea that we're a moral framework under a constitution and so on. But now we have a moral reality for human beings, right? That transcends in everywhere. If you remember from reading these first 9 articles, everywhere, the legislators and the members of these agencies have to take a pledge of service to humanity, right? Not a pledge of service to any particular in the United States it's against all enemies, domestic or foreign, but there's no enemies here, right? So now you have the capacity to really do service to humanity, which means that they're going to be thinking in terms of justice, right? And true, China is producing all this. No one wants to be unjust to China, right? But much of what China produces comes to the United States and is appropriated by the rich who own these multinational corporations, right? That has to be modified. You just can't have a system like we have, a world system, which ultimately, after 4 centuries of operation, puts 50% of the world's wealth in the hands of a tiny fraction, 1% of the world's population. That's just unjust. So the goal of justice and equitability is built into all these things. And so I think we have to say that the World Parliament will be making decent decisions, right? They've got the mandate, create an equitable world system, and the World Parliament will be full of Chinese people, right? China has and they're not going to want to vote against their own country and so on. They're going, so you're going to have a mandate for the whole, to make it a decent world for everybody on the planet. Okay, and then Hannah Arendt, she said that power was a good thing because power comes when government is supported by its people, right? A government that is with the real consent of the governed and the enthusiasm of the people for their government is powerful. That's where power comes from. And insofar as government loses that consent and that underpinning of the real authority of the people, then the government has to resort to violence of various forms, she said. So what we want to repudiate is not power, she said, but violence. And if you look at this Constitution, everywhere it is designed to reduce violence. Even the world police, as we'll look at in 2 weeks, right? Even the world police designed to reduce violence. Okay, a couple other questions.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Let me just say we've officially reached the end of our time. Glenn, if you could stay another 5 minutes, I'll get another question or 2 in, and also I'll check to see if there were any announcements that any people had. So Glenn, First question is to you. Do you need to run to something else, or can you stay another couple of minutes?
I've got
you're available. Great. Second question to the group. were there any group members that had either a book, a program, or anything they want to announce? Because I'll then give you time for that. Okay, I see Arthur. Anybody else? Okay, so Arthur, let me let you get your minute in right now while everyone's still here, which was my promise, and then we'll extend the session for 5 minutes for those that have other questions. So Arthur, go ahead, and then I'll get back to the queue that we had. David Orton is up next after that. Go ahead, Arthur.
Well, very exciting presentation, Glenn, and thank you so much. I especially like the thing you were saying about money, and I think our need to create world money, and that's a whole different issue. But the announcement is that we, as some of you know, we have amazing opportunity to have our film now on public television stations across the country in April, and we have a GoFundMe, which we are working on right now. We're doing it in cooperation with Rotary International, because we figured this may be a way to draw in more funders. What we need is we're trying to raise right now 20,000, which is crucial for having the station relations rep, the promotional person we need to get a big audience, and so on. And I'll put the GoFundMe in the chat, or if Melanie, if you're listening, if you could stick that in the chat right now, I'd appreciate it. But what we'd love is everybody to just come and, even if it's a little bit or more, it helps push our thing and get it going. We're doing it as a salute to Rotary, because we thought, there's little ads before PR, before this public television stations, and they're not called ads, they're called underwriting spots, but they're sort of the same thing, except you can't say bye. And we're doing it that way because we think that'll attract more of some other funders. But it's really basically to get the film really promoted and out there on TV. So we'd love if all of you could just go to that GoFundMe and join in. I don't see Melanie typing it in, so I will. What it is just go to theworldismycountry.com/Rotary, and you can kick into the GoFundMe. Every little bit hurts. It helps. If it's just $5, it'll help.
It is in there now, and thank you. Yes, we're in overtime right now, so thank you.
Melanie has it in there. The GoFundMe. You'll see it there. Okay, great.
Lynn, I see
your
your
hand. You can save the chat by clicking on the little dots in the corner and save.
Thank you, Arthur. We must move on. Lynn, was that an announcement too for an event or something? You're on mute, Lynn.
I just wanted to clarify with Glenn that this would be back due. This justice that you spoke of would also be back due.
What do you mean by that?
From our non-global government times, when certain countries had more burdens than others.
Yeah, they don't want to, it's not going to be an oppressive system. Everybody's represented in it, but we really do have to make major systemic transformations, right? You can't have sovereign nation states owning, Brazil owning the lungs of the earth, and destroying them. You can't have this competition of different currencies. So if I go to Togo, for example, where we have a chapter, $1 US worth 7,000 of their currency, right? And so if I have $10, I'm super rich. We're going to have to, without undue burden on anybody, we're going to have to transform this world system. It just is not. It's unjust. It's power-based. It's exploitative. It's got to be changed. And the World Parliament has the mandate to do that. It has the power and the authority to do that.
Great. Thank you. We had David, Arthur and Gail in the queue, then we'll wrap up. So take it away, David Orton.
And several times in the Constitution, it talks about the 5 continents, but they're not explicit in the Constitution, as far as I know, although you did mention them. But the problem with the 5 that you mentioned is whether Russia is part of Europe or part of Asia, whether the Middle East is part of Asia, whether Australia is part of Asia. So how would all those questions be decided?
By the World Parliament. The World Elections and Boundaries Administration that we covered a moment ago, its job is to make sure these electoral districts are all equitable, but also its job is to divide them into larger groupings. right? So there's 10 magna regions, 20, and so as it's dividing them, it would make the, you know, the administrative decision where Europe stopped and where it began in terms of Russia and so on. And as just for me to repeat, I don't think the World Parliament will be torn apart by political bigotry like the US Congress is. I think the World Parliament will be there with a mandate to do well for everybody, and they'll be working together to do so this whole idea of political parties, you know, with their rabid dog ideologies will be gone. And so I don't think it'll be a big deal, you know, when people say, okay, Asia stops here, what are we going to do with Australia, and those kind of questions.
Great, thank you, Glenn. Arthur, did you have a question for Glenn, or was that your announcement that you made before?
No, I do have a question, and
Great, fire away.
on the thing that you mentioned about the fact that money is created privately. This is something that, you know, across left to right, people are worried about. Even the people storming the Capitol, they hate that the central banks control an economy that actually doesn't work for the people and actually is making people less poor. How I think that's sort of a key to moving this forward. Do you see ways that the idea of creating a democratic global currency, especially with all the cyber currencies and things happening, new opportunities for moving that forward in a big way?
I think the only way to you know, there's we work with one group called Mana, right, that have a digital currency that's called Mana, and this it's an alternative to Bitcoin, and it's free, right? So you can, you know, they have an NGO, and you can get a wallet, and insofar as they grow, as Mana grows and becomes more, they just distribute the money to everybody, right? That's a good thing. So we're for that kind of thing, spreading the idea of alternative communities, currencies, and fair currencies. But ultimately, it's got to be done for the world, right? Because the global powers in the world, if you read Ellen Brown's book, for example, you know, she gives all kinds of examples, currency manipulation, right? So the United States, if it wants to bring down Chile after they democratically elected Allende in 1970, it manipulates the Chilean currency to make it, you know, crash and so on. You've got to stop this absurdity of power being in charge of currencies and make money, as I was saying, a public utility for everybody, right? And we passed, the Provisional World Parliament passed one Provisional World Legislative Act with a guaranteed annual income for everybody, right? Once the digital revolution takes all these jobs away from people, and machines and robots are doing these jobs, people are going to need an income. And the world government can easily supply this because money creation is not created as debt.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. Gail, you have the last word. And since you're also the coordinator of the book club, you can bring us to a close and remind people of the next session.
Okay. On page 35, I noted the last item, 4.41. It sounds like that's an encompassing statement. So I wondered why that was kind of buried. And is it true that that's an encompassing statement? And then I wanted to ask if I have this right. The World Parliament has 3 houses: the People's House, the Nations, House of Nations, House of Peoples, House of Nations, House of Counselors. Okay,
Right.
the House of Peoples represents individuals. The House of Nations represents nations. The House of Counselors represents what I would call statespeople. I mean, the thing about the UN that's a fatal flaw in my estimation is that the representatives do not represent the world at large. So how can they
Right.
possibly be effective? It's a
Right.
fatal flaw. They're not even focused on, you know, on world
Right.
problems, really.
Right.
So
Right.
I was really pleased to see this House of Counselors and also the the pledge that you talk about, and I don't know who, is it everyone who takes this pledge to serve humanity as a whole? Or, I mean, I
Every-
gather that
Yeah,
do I have it
it's a-
right about these represent, the three houses representing the three kinds of entities?
Yeah, it's all over in the Constitution. These officials have to take the pledge of service to humanity. Even the people in the House of Nations, right? I mean, they may be chosen by their nation, but they have to take a pledge of service to humanity, right? And it says explicitly the House of Counselors will represent the whole of humanity, the common good.
Okay, good.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, so we have gone past our time in a very interesting discussion and intense, in-depth, substantive discussion. So next time we will finish the articles and discuss those. Glenn, I assume you're going to be joining us again
I'd be
for our
happy
next
to.
session. It's the second Saturday of March, which is March 13, same time, noon to 1:30 Eastern time. You can
Okay.
figure out when that is, everyone, for your own time.
Okay.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. And
Thank you all.
Bob and Glenn, will we stay on for a
Yes,
minute?
if you could stay on for a minute or two, that'd be great.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Great.
Thank
Thanks,
you all. Take
everybody.
care.
I had a question. And that is,